the taxi driver who found a newborn baby in his back seat. This is a 100% true story. It was nearly midnight when Daniel decided that he had driven enough for one day. He had been behind the wheel of his old taxi since 6 in the morning, carrying strangers through crowded streets, listening to their problems, their arguments, their laughter, and sometimes their silence. He was exhausted, but he kept telling himself that one more passenger meant one more little step toward giving his family a better life. Daniel was not a rich man. He lived in a modest house with his wife Maria and their 3 sons. His life was simple, but he was proud of one thing. He had always tried to be a good husband and a good father. That night, his final passenger was a young woman in her early 20s. She got into the taxi without saying much and asked him to take her to a quiet neighborhood far from the city center. During the entire journey, she kept looking through the window as if she was afraid someone was following her. When Daniel finally stopped at the address, she paid him quickly, opened the door, and disappeared into the darkness without even saying goodbye. Daniel watched her for a few seconds before starting the engine again. He was too tired to think about her strange behavior. He drove to the small parking area where he usually left the taxi overnight. Before going home, he opened the back door to collect a bottle and some papers left by passengers. Then he heard something. At first it was so quiet that he thought he had imagined it. He stopped and listened. There it was again, a tiny cry. Daniel slowly looked underneath the back seat. His heart suddenly began beating faster. There was a small travel bag hidden behind the seat. His hands began to shake as he pulled it toward him. He opened the zipper, and for several seconds he couldn't breathe. Inside the bag was a newborn baby girl wrapped in a thin blanket. She was tiny, frightened, and crying softly. Daniel looked around the empty parking area. "Where did you come from?" he whispered. There was no note, no name, no phone number, nothing that could tell him who had left her there. His first thought was to call the police immediately. But then he imagined what would happen. It was almost midnight. They would question him about the passenger, the route, the exact time, the place where he had found the child, and why he had taken the baby home. He could already imagine spending hours answering questions while his exhausted wife waited for him. But the baby started crying louder. Daniel forgot about everything else. He carefully lifted her into his arms. "Easy, little one, I'm here." He had never held such a tiny baby before. He looked at her little face and felt something he couldn't explain. Daniel had 3 sons, and although he loved them more than anything, he had sometimes dreamed about having a daughter. He had never told Maria because he knew their financial situation was difficult. Looking at the little girl, he whispered, "You are someone's daughter. Someone must be looking for you." Then he looked at the empty street and sighed. He knew he couldn't leave her there. He decided to take her home for the night, keep her safe, and contact the authorities in the morning. When Daniel opened his front door, Maria was still awake. She immediately noticed the baby in his arms. Her face changed. "Daniel, who is that?" He closed the door and took a deep breath. "Maria, please listen to me before you say anything. I found her in the taxi." Maria stared at him. "You found a baby?" Daniel nodded and explained everything. But instead of calming down, Maria became more upset. "A newborn baby just happened to be in your taxi?" "Yes, and you expect me to believe that?" Daniel was stunned. "What are you saying?" Maria looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You've been working late for months. Sometimes you don't come home until midnight, and now you come home carrying a baby girl?" Daniel realized what she was thinking. "Maria, no, don't even say it. I have never cheated on you." But she accused him of hiding something, of having another woman, of possibly having a secret child. Daniel kept explaining, swearing that the baby had nothing to do with him. The argument continued for hours. Finally, Maria wiped her tears and said, "Tomorrow morning, we're going to the laboratory. We'll do a DNA test." Daniel agreed immediately. He believed the test would end the argument once and for all. The next morning, they took the baby to the laboratory. The technician explained that the results would take several days. Daniel thought the hardest part was over. He was wrong. During that strange week, Daniel began noticing something disturbing. Every time he drove near the neighborhood where he had dropped his final passenger, he saw the same young woman. She was always at a distance. Sometimes she stood near a shop. Sometimes she sat on a bench. Sometimes she simply watched him from across the street before disappearing. Daniel began wondering who she was and why she seemed interested in him. On the fourth day, he finally decided to confront her. He stopped the taxi and walked toward her. "Excuse me, why have you been watching me?" The young woman became frightened. "I'm not watching you. I've seen you several times." She looked away. Daniel lowered his voice. "Do you know something about the baby?" The woman's eyes immediately filled with tears. Daniel knew he had guessed correctly. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "She's my daughter." Daniel froze. The young woman explained that she had become pregnant, but her parents had rejected her and threatened to throw her out of the house. She had no money, no job, and nowhere to go. She had been terrified. She had seen Daniel's taxi and believed that leaving the baby with someone who looked kind was safer than leaving her somewhere completely alone. Daniel couldn't believe it. "You left your own baby in my taxi?" The woman began crying. "I was scared. I thought someone would find her and take care of her. I didn't want her to suffer because of me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He wanted to be angry, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Before leaving, he told her, "Stay here. I will come back. Give me 8 hours." She looked at him desperately. "Will you really come back?" Daniel nodded. "I promise." Daniel drove home with 1,000 thoughts running through his head. He found Maria was not home. She often worked during the day, so the house was quiet. The baby was sleeping peacefully. Daniel walked into the living room and noticed an envelope lying on the table. His heart stopped for a moment. It was the laboratory report. He had almost forgotten about it. He picked it up and opened it carefully. He expected to see the result he had been waiting for. Instead, he read a sentence that made the room seem to spin around him. The test showed that Daniel was biologically incapable of fathering children. He read the report again, then again. "No," he whispered. He sat down. His hands were shaking. "This can't be right." He thought about his 3 sons. His oldest son, whom he had carried on his shoulders when he was little. His second son, who used to wait at the window for Daniel to return from work. His youngest, who still called him whenever he needed help. 3 boys. 3 children he had raised, protected, fed, disciplined, comforted, and loved. And now a laboratory report was telling him that he could never have fathered them. Daniel felt as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. He didn't know whether he was more shocked by the result or by what it might mean. He looked at the sleeping baby. She was innocent. She knew nothing about the secrets that were beginning to destroy the world around her. Daniel picked up the report and placed it in his pocket. He had promised the young woman that he would return in 8 hours. He couldn't break that promise. He took the baby, gathered the documents he thought might be important, and left the house. When he reached the meeting place, the young woman was still there. The moment she saw him, she ran toward him. "Where is my daughter?" Daniel showed her the baby. She immediately began crying with relief. "She's safe," he said. Then he looked at the young woman and told her something she never expected to hear. "I'm going to help you." She stared at him. "Why?" Daniel looked down at the baby. "Because this child didn't choose any of this." He paused. "And because someone has to stand beside you." The young woman asked what he meant. Daniel told her that he would not take her daughter away. He would not pretend to be the biological father. But if necessary, he would become the man who protected the child and helped her mother rebuild her life. The young woman began crying harder. "I don't deserve this." Daniel shook his head. "Maybe you made a terrible decision. But making one terrible decision doesn't mean you have to spend the rest of your life running from it." Then Daniel asked where her parents lived. She gave him an address. "I can't go back there," she said. Daniel answered, "You don't have to go alone." They drove together. When they reached the house, the young woman stood outside for several minutes, too afraid to knock. Daniel stepped forward and knocked on the door. An older man opened it. He looked at Daniel suspiciously. "Can I help you?" Daniel took a deep breath. He knew he was about to step into a family problem that had nothing to do with him, but he did it anyway. "Sir, this is your daughter." The man looked past him and saw the young woman. His face hardened. Daniel continued, "And this is your granddaughter." The man's expression changed. The young woman began crying. Her mother came to the door and froze when she saw the baby. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the grandmother slowly reached out and touched the baby's hand. Tears rolled down her face. The young mother finally whispered, "I'm sorry." Her father turned away, struggling with his emotions. Daniel didn't know what would happen next, but he knew that at least the truth was finally standing in front of them. After that day, the young woman's parents slowly began accepting their daughter and granddaughter. But Daniel still had another problem waiting at home. He knew he had to confront Maria. When he returned, she was there. She immediately asked about the baby. Daniel placed the laboratory report on the table. Maria looked at it. Her face went pale. Daniel didn't shout. He simply said, "Tell me the truth." Maria remained silent. "Please," Daniel said. "After everything that happened, I deserve the truth." She finally began to cry. What she told him changed everything. She admitted that she had known for years that Daniel was infertile. She had been afraid that if he discovered the truth, he would leave her and the boys. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "Then why did you accuse me of cheating?" Maria lowered her head. She said she had been terrified, confused, and desperate to protect the family she had built. But Daniel still had one question. What about the boys? Maria couldn't answer. Daniel understood. The laboratory report had not only answered one question, it had opened a door to a truth that had been hidden for years. Daniel felt betrayed, but when he thought about his sons, something inside him became clear. Whether they shared his blood or not, they were still the boys who had called him Dad. They were still the children he had raised. Blood could explain biology, but it could never erase years of love. The following weeks were difficult for everyone. Daniel and Maria had long conversations about their marriage, their mistakes, and the secrets they had kept from each other. Nothing could be fixed overnight. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But Daniel refused to punish the children for the mistakes of adults. One evening, he sat with his 3 sons and looked at them. They had no idea how close their world had come to falling apart. Daniel didn't tell them everything. They were children, and some truths were too heavy for them to carry. Instead, he hugged them and told them something simple. No matter what happens between the adults in this house, you will always be my sons. The oldest boy looked at him and asked, "Are you okay, Dad?" Daniel smiled even though his eyes were filled with tears. "I'm okay now." From that moment, Daniel's understanding of fatherhood changed forever. He had spent years believing that being a father meant having the same blood running through your veins. But life had just taught him something different. A father is the person who stays when things become difficult. A father is the person who gets up at 3 in the morning when his child is sick. A father is the person who worries when his child doesn't come home. A father is the person who teaches, protects, forgives, and loves without asking what he will receive in return. And now Daniel had one more child in his life, the little girl from the taxi. He didn't legally replace her mother. He didn't pretend to be someone he wasn't. Instead, he became a constant presence in her life. He helped the young mother find work. He helped her family repair their relationship. He made sure the little girl had everything she needed. Slowly, the child grew. Her first birthday came, then her second, then her third. Every year, Daniel was there. He took pictures, he brought gifts, he watched her learn to walk, and later listened to her first words. The strange night that had begun with fear had somehow created a new family connection. Years later, Daniel finally stopped driving his taxi. He had spent enough years behind the wheel. He used his savings to open a small transportation business, and life gradually became calmer. The young woman became independent and rebuilt her relationship with her parents. The little girl grew into a bright, confident child, surrounded by people who loved her. But she always had a special relationship with Daniel. She called him whenever she needed advice. She visited him on weekends. And although she knew he was not her biological father, she never treated him like a stranger. One afternoon, many years after the night in the taxi, she sat beside him and asked, "Daniel, can I ask you something?" He smiled. "Of course," she said. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" Daniel laughed. "How could I forget? Where was I?" "In the back seat of my taxi," she smiled. "And you didn't know who I was?" "No." "You didn't know my mother?" "No." "You didn't know anything about me?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing." She was silent for a moment before asking the question that had been in her heart for years. "Then why did you take me home?" Daniel looked at her. He thought about the empty street, the little bag, the tiny cry, the argument with Maria, the laboratory report, the young mother, and everything that followed. Then he smiled. "Because when I heard you crying, I didn't see a stranger." He paused. "I saw a child who needed someone." She looked down, trying not to cry. Daniel continued, "That night, I thought I had found you. But the truth is, you found me." Tears filled her eyes. She leaned toward him and hugged him tightly. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time, he understood the strange path his life had taken. He had started that night as an exhausted taxi driver who simply wanted to go home. He ended it as a man who discovered that almost everything he believed about family could be wrong. The baby in his taxi had exposed painful secrets, broken old beliefs, and forced him to face truths he had never imagined. But she had also given him something he never knew he needed, a deeper understanding of love. Daniel had learned that family is not always created in a hospital room. Sometimes it begins with a choice. Sometimes it begins when someone refuses to walk away. Sometimes it begins with a tiny cry in the darkness and a tired man who decides to stop and listen. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of his story. Blood can tell you where someone comes from, but love tells you where they belong. Daniel thought he had found an abandoned baby that night. In the end, he realized something much more powerful. He hadn't found her. She had found him.